Okay, this video will be how to remove and reinstall loaded struts in a 2005 Subaru Outback. I'm going to start by disassembly of the rear storage compartment. Sorry about the low lighting. Remove the hatch that covers your spare tire in the rear. Remove the two covers on the side of the rear hatch. Sorry about the poor lighting. You see there's a snap on either side, a little snap clip. Pull both of these covers, set them aside as well. Hopefully your cargo compartment is cleaner than mine, not full of tools, but that's what I do. Takes the front cover, flip it forward onto the back of the seat, which is folded down. The middle seat folded forward, front of this compartment folds over it, just leave it in place, out of the way. Directly behind the rear seat, underneath that last compartment cover that you just removed, folded forward over the seat, you've got these two nuts. Hopefully you can see that and where it's adjacent to the doors. You're going to loosen these. You can just get a wrench underneath there. It's hard to get a socket with this panel on. Not necessary to remove that panel. Just use a wrench. Be patient. A few turns to loosen it. And then spin them off. Just loose on both nuts. Loose. Leave them in there to support the top of the strut while you go underneath and remove the large bolt. Now underneath, to remove that large bolt, you're going to need an impact wrench to make your life easier, unless you have the car supported up on a hoist that has the car all the way in the air where you can get underneath it. Otherwise you won't have enough leverage to break those bolts loose. They have 112 foot-pounds on them. Now the first thing I did do is sprayed penetrating oil on each of the nuts. The lower bolt and nut is located just in front and below the rear axle. I'm using an electric impact wrench because that's what I have available. Use a 19 millimeter wrench to hold the nut. This was already sprayed with penetrating oil on the nut. Try to remove any dirt off the threads. I'm using two wrenches that I've got hooked together for leverage. I'll allow it to go against the floor when I tighten it. When I loosen it, I allow it to go up against the arm of the rear swing arm of the car. The wrench will just make contact here while I use the impact to remove it. So for assembly, simply put the wrench against the floor, tighten it till it's snug, remove the impact, and now we're going to torque it to 112 foot-pounds. Make sure the rear of your car is supported securely before you start. Use at least two attachment points, secure lifting points on the rear of the car to support it with jack stands. When you get it to where the wheels are several inches off the ground, I'm using Unity preloaded struts, which sit 1.5 inches or 2 taller than the old struts. So make sure the tires are a few inches off the ground. I've supported the bottom of the strut with a smaller portable rolling floor jack. It was actually necessary to use a bottle jack between the tire and the wheel well to push the tire down to get tension off of the strut. Had to do that because the strut is pushing down on the lower control arm. Made it tough for the bolt to come out. So by using a bottle jack above the tire, I'm able to relax that pressure against the swing arm and that lower strut bolt to remove it without damaging the threads. Since the upper nuts of the strut are located right inside the rear door, just behind where the back seat would be, which is folded up. This is the opposite side. This is driver's side, passenger side. I'm now on the passenger side. I can reach underneath the front of the rear wheel well to support the strut. Loosen those nuts, drop the strut down to the ground. Sorry about the bad light. Now both struts are removed. You can see that there's oil residue on the bottom of this strut. Indicates that this seal against the shaft or piston of the strut have been leaking. That's why the oil residue is there and all the dirt is attracted and dust attracted to that oil. The new struts come with an attention or a warning label. Do not remove this inner bolt and nut assembly unless you have a spring compressor and you've got slight pressure against these springs. Remove the tension, hold the center of the shaft with an Allen wrench, and then remove this nut. By purchasing loaded struts, you avoid the danger of working with these potential energy. If you remove these things can cause severe damage or death. That's what the warning's telling you. Don't do it without a spring compressor. Even a spring compressor, if you're not familiar with it, they can slip off and you can lose some teeth, bust a nose, break some fingers, or even more serious. Just buy the loaded struts, save all that hassle. Now we fed the new loaded struts in from the bottom, held it from the outside of the door, standing out by where the tire would be. Feed it up through the same opening that you pulled the old struts out, put the new ones in. Put these nuts back on, tighten them with a 14mm wrench. Depending on the brand, they may be a different size nut, but the existing Subaru struts were 14mm and the new Unity loaded struts were also 14mm. Snug them up hand tight. It's tough to get a torque wrench in there unless you have a crow's foot wrench for the end of your torque wrench. It's only 21 foot-pounds for these upper nuts with the 14mm crow's foot on a torque wrench. So what the torque wrench with the crow's foot looks like. So this is the method I chose to do on this side, was use a bottle jack with the 2x4 up in the wheel well so I don't run the piston of the bottle jack through the wheel well insert. Doesn't take a lot of pressure, but you have to move the tire down over 2 inches before you can get the lower swing arm to line up with the bottom of the strut. So I've also supported the strut, I'll show you on the other side, with a bottle jack on the wheel up top and then a small jack below the loaded strut. push a little bit of pressure up on the loaded strut, and then bring the swing arm, which doesn't have much pressure against it. Weight of the tire is just not enough to bring it down low enough for the bolt to line up with the swing arm hole. So again, apologize about the poor lighting underneath the driver's side of the car. Easter weekend 2019, it's been raining. So we're doing all this inside the garage, very tight, confined space. I don't have a lot of room in my garage on either side of the vehicle, so tough to get good angles. This is just to give you a general idea. So with one of the two rolling floor jacks, while the car is supported up on jack stands, I put pressure against the bottom of the loaded strut. See how much cleaner and shiny the new strut is compared to the old one. Doesn't have all the oil leaking down it. Use the bottle jack to push the tire down. Some people will remove that tire, but then it causes the issue of how do you push that swing arm down. There's other ways to do it. This is just the way I chose. Bottle jack inside the wheel well, push the tire down with some pressure, support the bottom of the loaded strut with one of the rolling floor jacks. 2 wrenches hooked together, a little redneck lever that I built to support the wrench while I torque this lower bolt to 112 foot-pounds. Again, this is not the only way to do it, just the way I chose to do it. So, found out it's better to have the torque wrench set to tighten instead of loosen. I just started to loosen that. Very tight, confined area down here. Make sure you get pressure against your wrenches. Make sure wrenches are seated all the way on. Not sure if we're going to hold the camera and get pressure on here with one hand for 112 foot-pounds, but let's see. Okay, do that till you hear the click at 112 foot-pounds. And she's tight. So at this point, I would simply remove the pressure from the bottle jack that's above the tire. Relieve the pressure on the rolling floor jack. Lifts the car up off the floor jacks, set it down on the floor, reinstall all of your interior. Since the compressor kicked on, might as well climb under the car, gave it time to cycle and shut off. Now I can show you how I simply seat the wrench up against the rear control arm on the passenger side. Do the same process. Tighten to 112 foot-pounds. Sorry about the grunting and groaning, but it's hard to hold a cell phone with one hand. Push 112 foot-pounds with the other hand with your arm extended way out in front of you. So, again, sorry about the poor lighting. I understand my lighting conditions suck, so don't leave any comments on that. And I'm trying to film this with real-life conditions of the average shade tree mechanic and basic tools used. Okay. Pressure is off of the jack stands. I've used the scissor jack that comes with an Outback. Remove pressure, lower the vehicle. Jack stands are pulled clear. Vehicle's coming down, load some pressure on those struts. At this point, if you're not doing the front, simply reinstall all the panels like I started to say when the air compressor kicked on, in reverse order. Front panel, each side panel, rear main panel. I'll give you a walk through of that. Well, proper lighting beneficial for many reasons. I just found this 14mm snap-on that I was looking for earlier, wedged down between the seat and the body of the front of the cargo compartment. Remove all your tools. Reinstall the front panel. Snap in both side panels. You can see the clips. Make sure they're engaged. Both sides. Rear main cargo panel, which covers the Subaru jack and spare tire. Okay, back driver's wheel well sitting over 4 inches. Clearance between the top of the tire and the rear wheel well. With the car back on the ground, all jack stands removed, the 2 top nuts torqued, 21 foot-pounds, bottom main bolt torqued to 112 foot-pounds. If you're only doing the rear loaded struts, you'd be ready to take the car for a test ride. If you were removing your wheels and tires like a lot of people do, you would want to make sure those were torqued, installed and torqued properly before lowering the car. 90 foot-pounds is recommended for the 2005 Subaru lug nut torque. Please verify all torque settings in your owner's manual or with Subaru. Torque for the upper struts have been reported 21 to 46 foot-pounds. So the front of the car, as you can see, is sitting about 1.5 inches lower than the rear of the car. If you were doing just the rear struts, you'd be ready to take it for a safety test. Now, this is not the end-all be-all, only way to replace your rear struts. This is just the way I chose to do it. I suggest looking at several YouTube videos, comparing, and find out which way is going to work best for you. I chose not to remove the tires and wheels just because I'm working in such a confined space, and I wanted to use a bottle jack to push the rear control arm down. There's other ways of doing it. This is just the method I chose. Make sure you follow all safety precautions. Use all PPE, personal protective equipment. Keep yourself safe. Avoid any pinch points. And be very careful of the stored energy in these preloaded struts. Do not remove the center nut, as that will release all the energy at once, causing severe damage or death. Make sure your car is supported securely. If the car falls on you, the weight of the car is plenty to crush you and possibly kill you. Be safe. Thanks for watching. If you're going to proceed on to the fronts, I'm going to do another video of that, and we'll see how the car sits in the front when we're done. Thanks for watching. Be safe.